Hello, CLA family, friends, colleagues, and community partners. Welcome back to our live stream. We sincerely hope that you are continuing to stay safe and healthy at this time. We appreciate all your questions and interactions that have come through the inbox at livestream@claconnect.com. The questions are wonderful and we are monitoring and responding to them daily. Please keep them coming through the session today, and we'll address as many as we can as we're live with you. We would like to direct you also to our COVID landing page at claconnect.com for more information on everything that we're discussing today, these programs, tools, options, and other information as it becomes live and available. We can also connect you as you have questions. There's a contact us button. Feel free to utilize that. And we can connect you with a consultant for more specific guidance as you have questions. Today, we are focusing once again on answering all of your frequently asked questions and fielding live questions from the inbox on Main Street Lending, PPP, and the EIDL programs. We have Jack and Todd back with us today, as well as a new face, Jana Rust, who's part of our EIDL team to help answer the questions coming in. Welcome, everybody.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi. So I'd like to start today's session with an update from Jack about the PPP program and some of the open application process at this point. So Jack, if you want to start us off with that news, that would be helpful.
Sure. So as we had talked kind of before the holiday, the SBA's authority to approve loans under the PPP had expired as of June 30th. And so there was a brief period of time when the program was on hold again. However, before leaving for recess, both the House and the Senate passed by unanimous consent an extension of the PPP program. So no changes to the terms per se, but just an extension taking the program out to August 8th. And so that's great news for borrowers because there's still over $130 billion left that had been allocated to the program that still has not been, applied for yet. So that's wonderful news. But as I mentioned, the last bill that passed and then got signed into law on the 4th by the president didn't do anything to modify the program, right? So there had been a lot of talk about potentially allowing certain borrower classes to expand their loan size or maybe allow people to apply for a second PPP loan once they had exhausted the initial loan. Nothing like that was included in the law that ultimately got passed. We did hear some other things like, for instance, Rick Scott from my state in Florida here had proposed that for new loans that an eligibility test be added related to economic need, right? So did you actually have harm shown by a decrease in revenues that you would have to show before you would be eligible to apply? Now that was for new loans. That did get shot down, though, by Senator Cardin, the ranking member from the Democrats on the U.S. Small Business Committee. And what he said, though, is that future changes to the program would be addressed in a next round of COVID relief legislation. So what that told us is obviously that's already being discussed, right? There is another round of legislation that is going to come out when both the House and then the Senate return, later on in July. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to be discussed. And we have heard about some of the proposals that are floating around out there. So there is one proposal that's got representation both in the House and the Senate right now, that if you have fewer than 100 employees and you can show that you had a decrease in revenues, that you would be able to take out a second PPP loan. So that's something that's floating around out there. I think Marco Rubio is advocating for another one specifically targeted at companies with 10 employees or less. And we also have heard that there continues to appear to be support for an amendment to the program that just allows everybody with loans under $150,000 to get forgiveness automatically just by signing a certification and not having to provide a bunch of information, right? So that was all interesting, related to kind of the application and the extension process. One other thing I did want to note was we also have heard more recently that certain members of Congress are looking for guidance from the SBA related to a borrower's ability to reapply for a loan. And I'll use the term borrower there because in certain circumstances, somebody may have applied for a loan, actually received the loan. However, because of all of the uncertainty around the program, the initial 8-week period, the certifications and the potential threats of litigation that were out there at the time, a number of companies actually returned the money before the early May deadline, that safe harbor that was out there. What we are hearing kind of informally now is that because of the 24-week period, some of those businesses likely might have made a different decision, right? They returned the money because they weren't going to be able to use it for the intended purpose during the 8 weeks. Well, what we're hearing now is that for those borrowers, because they returned the money before the safe harbor date was up, and therefore their loan was canceled, it's no longer on the books, right? Then if they apply again, they won't be applying for a second loan because it's as if the first loan doesn't exist. So we believe that it is possible now for a certain subset of those borrowers that may have returned the money initially to reapply and receive new PPP loans now too. And having this August 8th date out there now gives them an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how all of that flows together. And once that's formalized, how it all looks. You mentioned that second round of funding. So a question that we keep seeing coming in is,
So Jen was going to be asking about whether or not additional loans could be obtained in the whole second round that we did. We are receiving some questions there related to that. And unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, there was not an expansion of the program as a result of the recent extension that was granted, right? It was an extension. So things like being able to expand your loan and get an extra month of salary, for instance, or the ability to apply for a new loan, those things would need to come in the next round of COVID legislation. So, Jen, I kind of went with your question that you were just about to get through there, and you are back with us now. So we're glad to have you back. You do a much better job moderating than I do receiving, that's for sure. So.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, sorry about the technical difficulties here on my end. So it sounds like, if I heard you correctly, that you kind of walked through some of the treatment of utilities and all of that. So, maybe Todd, I know you had a few comments on this as well.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the lack of guidance too, and Jack had alluded to it earlier, there's also that proposal that's been floated about blanket forgiveness or automatic forgiveness. And so I just thought I'd give you a little perspective from the lender point of view. Some of you may be reaching out and asking, can I apply now? Why can't I apply now? Or you might be receiving some proactive communication from your lender. And I just wanted to say that from the lender's perspective, they're in the same boat as you, so to speak, in that forgiveness, achieving full forgiveness is beneficial to both parties, the borrower and the lender in this institution. It frees up lender capital and it gets them through the program. But I would say if they're either communicating proactively about not taking applications yet or setting certain dates, a little patience. What they're doing is just preventing you from submitting information that you may not have to submit or altered depending on how that automatic forgiveness evolves, and save you from doing that, as well as just expectations, because once you submit, there's also an expectation that then you'd expect an answer. And until they receive some guidance from SBA, they won't be able to do that. So anticipate that once that SBA guidance comes out, there's going to be a short implementation period to where they can comply with that and make sure that system's working correctly, and then they'll start taking applications. So just letting you know that if you see that guidance come out, there'll be a little period of implementation there, and then they'll be able to start taking applications. So if you're not even hearing dates, it's because they just don't want to even speculate as to when that guidance will come out. They'll just need to react to it.
Yeah.
Jen, can I add, if maybe I can add just a little bit to that as well. I've been doing a number of bank presentations recently, and the banks are trying to communicate to their borrowers, their expectations, and because the fact that they don't have that back end communication mechanism yet with the SBA, everybody's hesitant to throw dates out there now. But I think most of the working groups that I'm hearing that the banks are involved with are still targeting kind of an end of July, early part of August date where they're going to be doing this. And Todd's point about the under 150, I heard some interesting facts about that. There's some estimates, and the reason that this has a lot of legs to it is that there are some estimates that on average it's going to cost a borrower around $2,000, let's just say, to go in and complete their loan application. And that's, with legal help and accounting help and things like that, roughly $2,000. Talk about the borrower, the lender side, on their side, they have to look at all that information too. So there's another $1,000 there. So there's an estimate that I've seen of around $3,000 per loan that it would take to process that forgiveness. Now, there are 3.8 million loans in that under $150,000 bucket, right? So that's over $10 billion worth of expenses that potentially could be avoided in the system by doing that forgiveness, right? And since the whole spirit is to keep the money in the pockets of these individuals and these companies, why wouldn't you do something like that? So I really do think there's a high likelihood that something like that will ultimately come about in the next round of relief legislation.
Yeah, that'll definitely be something to watch for. It's kind of exciting to see how we are pivoting as a nation just to accommodate all of these expenses, all of these changes. And Todd, I think what you were saying there too really helps manage people's expectations around the communication and also understand why they're not necessarily hearing those dates that we want to rely upon, but we want to make sure that we get the right information before we proceed with anything. So, guys, that's both incredibly helpful. Jack, while we still have you and we're kind of on the PPP topic, I'd like to just field some questions that have come in from the audience while we've been talking. Tom was asking, and I'm just going to read it, do you have an update on the deductibility of expenses paid by the forgiven loan proceeds? In the absence thereof, and assuming you have a surfeit of qualifying forgivable expenses, can you choose to divide compensation to owners and salary, rent, utilities to result in the best after-tax benefit?
Yeah. So, I guess I'll take this in a couple different ways. So the first thing is we do continue to hear that Congress intends to include something in the next round of COVID relief legislation to get rid of this problem, right? That it was legislative intent to allow these costs to be deductible and not have the income be taxable, so to have that double benefit effectively. And we are hearing that there's bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate to have something like that in the next round of legislation. So let's hope that this is not an issue. But Tom, back to your question, which is a great one. There is an opportunity when you do go through your forgiveness application, if this doesn't get fixed, to do some tax planning here, because you only need to report items on your loan forgiveness application that you would like to request forgiveness for, right? And so let's take a business that has a bunch of owners that work in the business, right? Those are general partners in a partnership, for instance. You can get up to $20,833 per partner as part of that loan for forgiveness. Now, those people are not getting reductions of your taxable income, right? Because those are paid out of K-1s and everything, so they don't affect the taxable income of that entity. Whereas if you used $2 million worth of salaries for normal employees on the flip side, that would actually increase your taxable income. So if you only needed $2 million, for instance, you could allocate 100% to owner compensation, none to employee compensation, and achieve 100% forgiveness and still get deductibility because you would not have used PPP loan proceeds for those employee payroll costs, right? So there are opportunities to plan that. Now you're going to need to look at loan size and what those opportunities are at the time. Hopefully we won't have to worry about that, but once we get to September, October, if nothing's passed, then clearly an opportunity to do some planning on your part when you request forgiveness.
Yeah, that's just yet another reason why it's so important just to keep that dialogue open with your advisor. When you were talking about planning and payrolls and things, we had Mallory come in with a multiple payroll question, and she's saying, she's having a hard time finding an answer about whether she has to use both payrolls, monthly and weekly, for this. She said their weekly payroll is job costed and their monthly payroll is overhead. So in which she's wanting to know if she can only use the monthly payroll and not have the weekly field employee payroll involved at all, and is that an option?
Yeah, and again, I'll go back to my comment earlier in that you only need to include the costs on your loan forgiveness application that you're requesting forgiveness for, right? We've had some people that said, oh, well, I can now just take the 24-week period and use 100% payroll, so I'm not even going to worry about collecting my healthcare, retirement, utilities, rents, all those. I'm not even going to worry about aggregating that information because it's, voluminous, and I'm just going to focus on payroll because I use a payroll provider and they're giving me my reports, right? So you can do the same for payroll though, right? So now that you've got, let's say you've got 50% field employees and 50% administrative, now you can go to a 16 or 24-week period, use just the administrative payroll, which might be easier because it's only done once a month. So now you're going to have 5 pay periods instead of, 24 weekly periods that you have to deal with. And those are likely salaried, so your FTE counts are a lot easier than hourly people. And so you could make the decision to do that. And again, all you have to be cognizant of is you have to make sure that to get 100% forgiveness, you accumulate enough eligible costs, and then those eligible costs need to tie back to payroll data. So if you include the payroll data to get to eligible costs, then you need all the detail. But if you can get there using a subset, you can do that as well.
Yeah, excellent. We're getting, I want to make sure we move through like all of the topics here, but there's a question that we keep hearing in so many different variations I want to cover again with you today while we're still together. And that is, when you have somebody whose employee opts not to return to work during the pandemic due to concerns regarding an ill parent or themselves or just whatever the case, how is that going to affect the forgiveness data? Could you just kind of summarize that again for everybody?
Yeah.
We're starting to hear that.
So I guess two different answers maybe to this question, right? So we now have 2 applications out there. We have the Form 3508 EZ, right? And so that's the application a borrower will use when they don't expect to have a reduction because of wages or FTE count, right? So you have 3 tests you can meet, and if you meet those, then you can use that form. Let's just say that this was an employee that left, and because of concerns like that, and you didn't rehire them, so you couldn't make the claim that you didn't have a headcount reduction, and you didn't meet the safe harbor that you couldn't conduct normal business activity. Well, you would be scoped out of the EZ form. So in that case, there would be a negative impact to you. You'd be scoped out of the EZ form. However, when you got to the long form, the original Form 3508, there is exemptions related to the FTE test, right? There's specifically 3 of them, right? So if you involuntarily terminated somebody for cause, if somebody voluntarily terminated, or if somebody voluntarily requested a reduction of hours and you granted those hours, right? Those three circumstances do not count against you from an FTE perspective. Now, we don't know exactly what doesn't count against you mean. We don't know how to apply that in practice yet. But you could think that, maybe you would add one to the FTE count on the top or reduce one on the FTE count on the bottom, for instance, to take that into consideration. But the guidance is that you should not be harmed. You should not have your forgiveness reduced as a result of something like that. So you would be kicked into the long form in order to benefit from that, but you should not be hurt from a forgiveness perspective due to a situation like that.
Excellent. And I think that really helps people understand too that, like, although that Form EZ may be really beneficial and shorter, there are still options and things to do if you stick with the original form. So I really appreciate that, Jack. I hope you can stay around because I know we have had a few more questions coming in. But again, I'd like to kind of pivot the discussion to also the EIDL and also the Main Street lending in the next 10 minutes here. So Jana, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on the live stream today. It's good to have you here.
Yeah, good to be here.
I'm looking forward to having you answer some of the questions that we've seen come in the inbox. But before we do that, I was wondering if there was anything by way of introduction that you'd like to discuss before we really get started with those questions.
Yeah, I think I'd like to start off by saying keep the big picture in mind. I always like to talk about that. You hear Jack, if you've watched these over time, you've heard him always say, keep within the spirit of the law or the legislation. With respect to this and everything, think of the spirit of the SBA. Okay, so with all of the SBA facilitated loans, even though the specifics may differ, there's a common underlying premise, and that the loans existed there. They were intended to indemnify rather than enrich the borrower. So whether that's in the form of low interest loans or forgiven dollars, people need to keep that filter in mind whenever they're borrowing the money or planning how to use their money.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment and a point. As you say, that can be applied across all of these circumstances. To stick with the spirit of everything. That said, I think we can move directly into the questions. I wanted to start with one that came in from David in light of the July 15th tax deadline. He says he has a pass-through entity and $150,000 EIDL in place. He also has a July 15th, 2020 estimated tax payment pending. So since they had a very good Q1 2020, the tax is a significant amount. Is there any solution for getting written approval from the SBA for a distribution allowance for the tax payment due?
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't appear that there is. Now's the time to dust off your old textbook or whatever where you learned about working capital, because working capital does not include any equity. So you try to talk to your own SBA representative if you could get a hold of one. You might want to email them through the portal. May be difficult to do since the office is so overwhelmed with all of the application process and the loans. It was all completed through a portal, so it's difficult, but it's possible to talk to someone.
Excellent. Bonnie asked a question of, can you get loan forgiveness for both if you receive the full amount for both PPP and EIDL? So like if she received PPP first, EIDL second, so full eligible amounts were received. And if you can, are there EIDL restrictions and what's the time frame for spending?
Okay, so the EIDL advance that people got, the famous up to $10,000 advance, that is mainly an advance on anything that would be forgiven with respect to with respect to the PPP loan program. So you would not get forgiven twice. You're just going to get forgiven in the total of what you would be forgiven for on the PPP. With respect to the restrictions of the use of funds, you can only use EIDL proceeds for working capital. So the SBA.gov website defines working capital as the amount of capital available for day-to-day operations of the business. So I actually talked to somebody on with the SBA on this. If some a lady that did a lot of them, and she said, you just keep thinking about your ordinary course of business. And of course, she then clarified that she wasn't an attorney. So anyway, but some.
I think I see a lot of that clarification going on.
Yeah. So the restrictions, they do include you can't pay dividends or bonuses to anyone. Dividends to your ownership, disbursements to owners, partners, officers. Now, don't if that's a salary and the person is an employee / they're very active in the business. There's an exception that if the person is directly related, what they're doing, that payment is directly related to what a person is doing for the business and the benefit of the borrower. Then you can pay them for that. So you can't pay stockholder loans. You can't expand your business with respect to facilities or acquisition of fixed assets, replacing physical damages. I'm just going down a list. Refinancing long-term debt. They don't want you paying off any other loans, so you can't pay off your PPP loan or your Main Street loan or whatever that is with these funds. Debts, penalties, and I think the last one they list is relocation. So I don't know what exactly that means, that someone might relocate, but they don't want you doing that.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I mean, and sometimes it is just worth it to like walk through those lists and make sure you're staying consistent. You know, one, obviously not doing anything you're strictly prohibited from doing, but then also to the extent that the question pops into your head to stick with your original guidance, which is remember what this is about, you know, so. Lois asked the question, she said, you know, we have received the $10,000 EIDL advance, you know, then we got the loan paperwork. And she's saying, do they complete that for the $10,000 if they don't want to receive any additional funds? Their board doesn't want to take on any more debt and doesn't want to take the loan. So she only wants the $10,000 received and not to end up with, you know, $20,000. So she's just wondering what she does next as it relates to the paperwork.
Okay. Yeah, this is the question of the day because people keep getting emails and they think it's a fishing expedition with respect to this. But if you've already received the EIDL advance, you will get because you partially applied for the EIDL loan, you will get an email, maybe a phone call. I think most of them are emails coming through with your application number on there. It is asking you to complete more information. You do not have to complete more information, and I do believe that time there is an expiration date on that. So you don't just get money given to you without additional action on your part.
Okay, I think that's super helpful. So those emails are not phishing, but definitely not required to complete unless you want the additional funding. It sounds like I'm hearing that correctly. So Jana, thank you so much. I know we do still have a few questions coming in, so we'll also keep you around to the extent that there's more time, and also just encourage people to continue to reach out to the live stream inbox with additional questions regarding EIDL. Todd, I'd like to pivot the discussion to you now just to learn more about what we now know about the Main Street Lending Program. I'm wondering if you could give us just some quick headlines about what's been happening.
Sure, I can do that, Jen. It's still been slow to roll out. It has rolled out much slower than expected. And as I think I've covered in previous live streams, there's the issues of making sure that 95% of the loan that gets sold to the Fed comes off the bank's balance sheet. But I'm confident that'll get addressed. And then from the lender side, I think there's two more. One, the risk reward, the fee and interest income associated with the loan versus the risk of having a 5-year term loan out there with deferred payment structure like it does. That's I think slowed some of the lender interest in the program, and then also some regulatory scrutiny risk that usually exists with these type programs. And I think on the borrower side, there's three things also that they're finding frustrating, I think, in the process, or that have limited the interest in that, and that is the applicability of the affiliate rules again, and how that can limit your loan amount or your eligibility. Then when you look at the inflexibility with being able to pay some of the other debt, and then the last would be the need to have the equal footing or pari passu on in terms of security and priority of those Main Street loans versus the other debt that you may have. That's continued to just make this program a slow rollout.
Yeah, excellent. I think Sandra did a good job of just asking a question that we all kind of want to know, which is, so can a company apply for Main Street Lending Program loan yet? And if so, is there a specific application required by the Fed?
Yep, you can apply. but you don't find the application on the Fed website. So I'll compare and contrast it to PPP, just so you know the process of obtaining the loan. Under PPP, you went to a lender, but that lender then submitted your application to the SBA for approval, and then that came back. Once the lender received that notification, they made the loan. The process is different under Main Street. Under Main Street, if you went to the Fed website and looked for an application, you'd just find instruction that you should find an eligible lender and that you can see the instructions on what an eligible lender is. And so it varies from lender to lender. The lender actually makes the loan, originates the loan, and then sells it to the facility. The Fed doesn't have any approval process ahead of time. They just buy a portion of the loan from the bank. So then I think that leads into the next natural question, which is, okay, Todd, how do I find an eligible lender, right, under this program? And I can tell you that with some additional instructions that came out yesterday, also came out a map in which they show you can click on your state and find your eligible lenders. But I'm going to tell you the couple things that I noticed when I did that. One, there aren't very many out there. And I know of other lenders that aren't on that list right now. So that's, don't be concerned. It is limited right now. But I would tell you this. If I look at that, there will be more lenders, I think, that may express interest. And I think it's hard as a borrower, it would be hard for you to evaluate those. Even though the map is now available, it's hard to evaluate. So I would suggest if you do have questions, either if you want to find that site where you can find the eligible lenders, or if you look at that list, because it might be as thin as 10 or less lenders in a certain state, it's hard for you to evaluate, could that borrower or that lender meet my needs or not? So if you kind of know your loan amount and you have some sizing, feel free to just message us through the live stream at CLA Connect, and I'd be glad to look at that state and based on the loan amount that you think you're eligible for, see if there's a certain lenders that maybe are better for you than others, because I think by size, you wouldn't know the size of the bank and what their lending limits are, whereas we may be able to provide some, prevent some of that frustration for you. So feel free to ask us for help.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion and a really good service at this point, especially too, because, as you said, like you and I have even been talking to a couple of banks about, their pursuit of the Main Street Lending Program and what that's going to look like. So as things grow, as you have information, I think that's nice for you to do that network and make the connection. One question that's come in as we are talking about the lender role and some things that are going on, just to kind of move back to PPP, but it's if a PPP borrower receives a notification that the lender sold their loan, should there be any cause of concern?
Yep. No cause for concern, Jen. That is just, as I expressed before, like forgiveness is good for a lender because it gets those PPP loans off their balance sheet and relieves them of some capital requirements. This is just another avenue that the bank is using to relieve themselves maybe of some capital requirements, other requirements. And if they sell those loans to another party, from what I've seen and the transactions I've seen that have some data available with them, the loans have been sold at pretty much just under the loan value. So they're not buying them at a deep discount. So what that tells me also is they're just moving those things off their balance sheet to another lender. So theoretically, there should be no difference in the way they assess your forgiveness application, and they should have the same objective because those margins are so thin that I'm seeing on those sales. They should still have the same objective of being cooperative, and that forgiveness would be in the best interest of that party that purchased their loan, just as much as it would have been had that other party retained your loan. So no concerns on sale. It's just going to be you're going to go through somebody else for a forgiveness process than you would have otherwise.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And unfortunately, this time has flown so quickly for me, particularly today. I wish we could come back with even more questions, but I want to take just a second, Jack, Todd, and Jana, to thank you all for the great discussion today, for answering what has come in. I'd like to encourage the audience to continue to submit their questions through the live stream at claconnect.com inbox, and also visit us on our COVID landing page at claconnect.com. Feel free to use the Contact Us button for that connection with advisors for some more specific consultation. Next week, we'll be back on Thursday with any additional updates that we have, as well well as a deep dive discussion on the impact of COVID legislation on the dealership industry and considerations you may face when trading in or purchasing a new automobile in the current economic situation. So please send in your questions in advance of that session, and we'll cover what we can while we're together, but we'll also respond to you as quickly as possible. So thanks again for your time today. If you'd like, and you haven't already registered to subscribe to our emails, where we do send out updates, information on all of the economic relief options, as well as tax considerations going on this time of year, and demos of our forgiveness tools and other features that are available for planning, please do click on the link to the box below me and subscribe to the email service. Thanks again for your time today. I hope you have a great weekend. And as a reminder, we'll see you on Thursday of next week.